I am Samite. I am a musician. I am a refugee. And I have a profound interest in how music heals people from pain and trauma. First, let me tell you how I became a refugee. Growing up in Uganda, I spent most of my time with my grandparents. The head of that house was my grandfather. We called him Jaja. He was a relative of the king and a wealthy man who was also very humble. He gave up all his wealth to his wife so he could spend his life bringing Christianity to people in East Africa. He could have afforded any pair of shoes, but he chose to wear wooden shoes that peasants wore. When I was a little boy, he would hold me by the hand and lead me to the forest to talk. As we walked, his wooden shoes would crush the fallen leaves. And in the forest, he'd share his wisdom with me. He taught me not to pay attention to material things, that they were ultimately meaningless. One day, my birthday was coming up, and I went to him. I said, Jaja, do you have big plans for me? Are we going to have a big party? No, he said. Those are the material things you should avoid. I was very disappointed. I was hoping I was going to get my Batman suit. Next to our house was a big forest. In the morning, you'd hear sounds of birds, sounds of monkeys coming out of this forest. I remember a big bird called the crested crane. He'd land in the opening behind our house, and we'd get very, very excited. And we'd sing a song for him. Ngali saba saliza, ngali saba saliza bana mweyogerere. He'd spread his wings really wide and give us a dance. That's what we thought until we saw a female crested crane landing right there. So we knew that dance wasn't for us. In the evenings, you'd hear sounds of drums and music coming in from the hills around us. Life was perfect until a dictator called Idi Amin Dada came to power. Idi Amin and his henchmen became paranoid that some people were plotting to overthrow their government. So they started kidnapping people and torturing them for information. People started to die. The birds stopped singing. Music stopped. In the beginning, we thought the kidnappings and the torture happened to other people. But soon, that senseless killing touched all of us. In my own family, my big brother, Richard Mulondo, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. My stepdad, Dr. Paul Wamala, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Death became the new normal. In 1982, I had to escape. I became a refugee in a country called Kenya, in a place called Thika. That's where the refugee camp was. Staying in that refugee camp taught me a different way of looking at life. It didn't matter whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher, or a street beggar. We were all just the same, refugees trying to survive. In fact, the king of the camp was a man called Sunday. He was a street beggar. He used to be a street beggar. First, let me tell you a little bit about this refugee camp. It was way, way out there in a desolate place with a very high fence. And there was always a great fear that people could be killed, poisoned by the governments of the countries that they fled from. So the cook always ate first, before anyone dared to take a bite. There was no real entertainment in that place other than one black and white television that we used to run to watch our favorite TV show called Dallas. We called it JR. And because they recycled through maybe 4 episodes, most people, had seen everything. So they would tell the newcomers what JR was about to say and do next. And the newcomers would scream, "Shut up! Don't tell me." But the real entertainment would start after the guards would interrupt our JR show and send us back into our dormitories. They would come and do a head count and then lock us in. That's when we'd jump off our bunk beds and sit around Sunday's bed. Sunday, as a little boy, contracted polio. so he couldn't walk the many miles to school. When he grew up, he became a street beggar. And from his perspective on the ground, he watched and saw how the conmen and all the thieves worked. So he had so many stories to tell us. We especially love this one story that we turned into a game that we played on the newcomers. Because we didn't have money, we'd take beans and put them in the newcomer's pocket. And Sandy would come and slap them on the face and steal the beans. The surprised look on the newcomer's face sent us to bed laughing and smiling. I would watch to see how long it would take, the bank manager, the lawyer, to realize that it was Sunday they needed to befriend, to get respected in that refugee camp. This reaffirmed to me the way my grandfather looked at life, that all human beings are inherently equal. After I left the refugee camp, I was allowed to work in Nairobi, but I didn't feel safe in Kenya. So in 1987, I migrated to the US. And 3 years later, I was established as a musician in the US. One day at the end of a concert I was doing upstate New York, I was approached by a gentleman who used to be a former, Peace Corps volunteer. And he asked me to join him to do humanitarian work in Africa. Mind you, this was at the time when there was ethnic cleansing going on in Rwanda, massacres going on in Liberia. I just said, yes, I want to go. What I really wanted to say was, no way. I don't want to go back to Africa. But I wasn't too concerned. This guy didn't look like he could really put together a trip. But 3 months later, he'd convinced PBS to air a documentary we were going to shoot called The Song of the Refugee. I found myself on a plane to Liberia. After we landed, we headed towards an IDP camp, internally displaced persons camp. There, the children looked so sad and so lost. They'd seen so much death and so much suffering that they had become numb. Flies went in and around their eyes. They didn't even blink. Soon I found out that by playing my kalimba and my wooden flute, the kids would start to focus again, and they would start to talk to me. They would tell me they had their own song they wanted to share. The mothers would hear the kids singing and laughing and clapping. The mother would come and join in and take over the whole show with their own songs. Slowly, even the men joined in. This happened everywhere we went, but it was especially powerful in Rwanda, where the ethnic cleansing had taken so many lives. There I met a young 6-year-old boy who, after hearing my flute, told me his family and all his friends had been killed. But he soon took off and brought me a new friend he had just met at the camp. He wanted the new friend to hear the flute, so I played for him too. Soon I had about 30 kids around me playing and singing and clapping, playing buckets as drums. That's when I knew I had to do something. I had to do something to make it possible for me and other musicians to share our music in places where people needed the healing power of music. So I created Musicians for World Harmony. A few years later, I was now fully committed to explore the healing power of music with Musicians for World Harmony. I asked my agent that wherever he booked concerts for me, if he would also organize for me to share my music in hospitals for children and adults with cancer. The first one of these places he organized was somewhere near Grand Rapids. It was a big cancer center in a big round building. The sound in that building was tuku, tuku, tuku. There was a big, long hallway going around that building. And off the hallway were cubicles. And in each cubicle were recliners. That's where people sat as they received their chemo. So I walked around and around and around looking for who I was going to connect with until I saw him. He was a tall man with a mean face. So I introduced myself, and he couldn't believe I was talking to him. His shoulders were so high, and his face was so stiff. So I said, "Can I play you some music?" He just shrugged his shoulders. So I pulled out the flute and played for him. Immediately, I noticed his face becoming softer. The longer I played, the kinder he looked. Then I switched to the kalimba, the thumb piano, and I noticed he was tapping his foot. When I was done, he leaned forward and he said, "What the hell is that you're wearing around your neck?" So I knew he was ready to talk. So I told him about the nomads of Niger, the Udabi. I said, those guys, they have a festival where they wake up in the morning and they do makeup on their bodies, jewelry all over the place. And then the women come and choose the guy who has the best makeup, and that's the one they marry. He said, "I'll be dumb. Tell me more about those people." So I did. And I also told him about my family. So he relaxed and opened up. He pointed at the needle on his arm and he said, "You see this? This isn't the first time I'm doing this. The first time it didn't work. If it doesn't work now, I'm going to die. I'm so worried about my wife. How is she going to manage the farm without me? The machines are so big." I said, "I hope it works, my friend." So we talked more and shared our pain. He realized that we had the same sense of humor. We laughed at the same things. I know this was the first time for this man to meet someone like me. When his wife returned, he said, honey, come and meet my new best friend. He's from Uganda. His name is Samite." This man had learned to let go of judgment of me. He'd learned to look at what we had in common. This reaffirmed to me my grandfather's way, my grandfather's lessons, that we must let go of judgment of others and throw away fear in order to live peacefully. And we must look at the commonality between us in order to truly communicate. In my own life in the U.S., I was faced with extreme challenges. When my wife, Joanne, who I had been with for over 20 years, 2 days after Christmas, she could not pronounce my name. When she would try, she would just only come out with a sound like So I took her to the doctor, and there we were told she had a tumor size of a golf ball in her head, and it was incurable. But we still had music. Joanne fought this disease for about a year and 22 days. She loved to sing. But after the first operation, she couldn't sing anymore. So when we'd sing to her, she would just move her lips to go along with the song. I thought this was going to be an extremely challenging and difficult experience. But it turned out to be beautiful. My life became easy. My body, mind, and spirit became very strong. When I'd go in the studio to write music, music would just flow into my head. People would ask me, "How are you doing?" I'd say, "I'm doing just fine." And I was truly doing fine. I believe it was because I wasn't focused on myself. Quietly, Joanne's doctor told us that she was going to die, but we should not let her know. But then she came to me and said, "Why do I have this feeling that you were told I was going to die?" So I lied to her. I looked at her and said, "No, I don't know where you're getting that. You're not going to die." But then, a few weeks later, she found out that, yes, we'd been told she was going to die. And her best friend, me, had lied to her. She said, "I want to talk to you." My heart was boiling. My heart was beating. I was boiling inside. I sat next to her, wondering what she was going to say. She said, "Promise me one thing. Promise me that when I go, you don't marry the first woman who walks into your life." She was not thinking about herself. Life is easier when we take focus off of ourselves. I waited, but actually I didn't wait. I made all kinds of mistakes until finally I found the right wife, the right woman who, even up to now, we have Joanne's pictures all over the house, even in the place where I write music. Music heals. Can you sing with me? Say, "Ah yeah, ah yeah." Ah, yeah, ah, yeah. No, a little bit more life. Aye, aye. Aye, aye, oh tata. Aye, aye, chokamama. You guys are the best. Can you give me the beat? That's it. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Uma kumaya. Uma kumaya. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nobody knew. Thank you.